Welcome back to another edition of Cape Ann Today. As always on Mondays, we are joined by Erika Brown, the publisher and editor of The Cricket, coming at us from the offices over in Manchester by the Sea. How are you, Erika?
I'm doing great, and I made sure I called Heather before this to make sure I wore the right top.
Really That's great. We're all going bowling after, yeah.
I don't know when that happens. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's great.
Actually, we often do have a kind of a vibe going. Yeah, and it's totally unchoreographed.
Totally.
Okay, so lots of stuff happened this week, Erika. Where do we want to start with? We want to start with the election in Essex. Do we want to start with the candidates forum?
Well, it's election season, so with the Essex election, basically the only contested election, we talked about this last week, was planning board, and the elections came through, and it was the incumbent Matt Greco won over Brett Prince. That was kind of a thing. The only other surprise, the drama was in Constable. There was a write-in candidate who won, and Anthony Cula. I'm so sorry if I pronounce
Spell it.
Ciulla.
Shula. Shula.
I apologize, Anthony. But it was the write-in candidate, and so he has to be contacted by Pam Thorne, the town clerk, and invited to serve.
Oh,
I love that.
What was the turnout, Erika?
The turnout was about 20% of the registered voters. Candidate was about 550 about.
Okay.
And that's about 20% of the registered vote.
If it was a serious push for a write-in, that's amazing.
Right.
If it was a joke, that's even more amazing.
I think it's either way. I think it might be in between. From the numbers, it wasn't a huge write-in thing. Billy Novak, is the guy who kind of was the big, winner, not a write-in. And he was sort of, I guess, we'll know in the future if it was a serious write-in effort or not.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. Anyway, the big thing really, in all seriousness, is about in Manchester, tomorrow's election. And the local election has really broken down into two races, both of which are incredibly kind of, I'm going to say, have healthy issues attached to them, have engaged people attached to them and people watching them. That is for the select board of selectmen, select board. And that's a three-way race for 2 seats between Kathy Bellata, the incumbent Jeffrey Bodmer Turner, and Brian Solacey. We had that forum a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, and that's been running on 1623. And that drew, a good, healthy number of people. And that issue is about regional dispatch. It's about affordable housing, the Affordable Housing Trust Plan. It's about zoning. It's about, all sorts of things. The school committee race, which is 5 people going for 2 seats, so that's a little tighter. We had that forum last week, and that had over 100 people who showed up at the cafeteria at the Manchester Essex Regional High School. And that is every bit as serious, perhaps more engaged, more heated, or had the heat quotient attached to it. Those issues, are completely different. And I remember talking to the people, the PTO, because we ended up moderating it with the PTO and with Eli Bowling, who is the outgoing Board of Selectmen member, 9 years on the select board. He's already been roped in. He was a moderator for the audience segment of it, which was fantastic because it could be very heated and very sort of, and those are 5 candidates going for 2 seats. So it's a tighter race. And it was very interesting to watch, frankly, and to listen in on once we got past the introductions, once we got past the prepared questions, which are sort of big issues, strategic plan, budget, those were the 2 kind of ways in. Those are pretty broad, important topics. Once you got into the audience, you suddenly got down to brass tacks about diversity and inclusion, curriculum, how should parents be able to opt out of curriculum, COVID, remote learning, there are a lot of very, very prickly issues that are attached to the school committee. So.
Well, I think what's so interesting is that these are national talking points, and they're right there in our little small towns.
That's a very interesting observation, and that's exactly right. And it was really interesting to see how all the candidates broke down. There's, as I mentioned, there's five. It's Eric Bradford. I'm going to go in alphabetical order as you know, because it's the fairest. But you have Eric Bradford, you have Kristen McLaughlin, Anna Lynn Mitchell. There was Erica Spencer, and then Nadia Wetzler, who is the fifth candidate. She wasn't actually able to be there in the forum because she had COVID in her family. Her husband came down with COVID, her daughter got sick, and out of an abundance of caution, she actually ended up sending a statement that was extremely thorough, very articulate, very interesting, and we read that, but she wasn't there at the forum. I would say that all five of those candidates, even though there's some pretty big differences, every single one of them, you didn't have a single person that said, oh, I want to be conservative about the school district and I want to save money. And you know what I like to call those nasty children, people who want to be on the school committee that say, you know, how are you're spending like drunken sailors, can't you cut and be responsible? And usually that's the tone you get. Every single one of these candidates, and there were very marked differences between them, but not one of them said, as a matter of fact, all of them said, one form or another, that the school district is one of the best investments that tax dollars can make, because it translates into performance of the school district, and that translates into property values. It's a vibrancy of your community issue. Every one of them. So they weren't arguing about any of that stuff. It was all the other stuff, the stuff that, you know, Heather, you said was sort of a national, sort of a microcosm of what's going on in the larger picture. All of that stuff. When should issues of gender identity be integrated into the curriculum, at what age? Remote learning, things like that, those were the things that were kind of talked about and brought up. What is the right of me as a parent, being able to decide what's right for my child? Should I be able to opt out? Versus, a couple candidates said it very compellingly and interestingly, like Eric Bradford said, listen, and they all said it, I shouldn't isolate him. They all said, listen, we're preparing our children for the bigger world to be successful. And if you think you're going to go into the corporation of today or a college of today and not be racially really sensitive and understand, you're not going to be modern, or
intellectually prepared, academically prepared. And so I think what we're really talking about is control of the curriculum.
Yes, which in many cases is not a local issue, is it?
Not at all, but it's become one. That's so interesting, right there in Little Manchester by the Sea.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. But I'll tell you, there is a huge support for things that have been cut from the district, such as a second language, learning foreign language in elementary school. You think that's a nice to have. It's a real differentiator for our school district. It really is. It makes our district really special. And I
remember when my kids were little and hearing that Manchester had, foreign language in the elementary school and thinking, ooh, that's a special school. That's a really, definitely is a.
I will say, in a moment of levity, speaking of kind of anything international, there was a moment of levity, even though it kind of wasn't. It was, and I'm going to say it was a moment of levity, and maybe you, Heather, are going to be like, that's not levity, that's important. And it is important. I'm going to say this. There was a French teacher. It was almost like she was out of central casting. She stood up. She's a parent. She's a resident of Manchester, but she also happens to be a foreign language teacher in Manchester. She's French. So she gets up. She's got a French accent, and she says, I'd really like to ask, and this is within this kind of pulpy, important conversation about race, gender identity, curriculum. And she gets up and says, the quality of the food in the school system is embarrassing. And she starts talking about how, and this is true, how in Europe they learn where their food comes from. It's healthy, it's nutritious, it sets them up to be better learning and to essentially be healthier and healthier kids. And she's so correct. And she was like really dissing on the fact that they have pizza twice a week now, and this is the post-COVID culinary curriculum. Programming is terrible, and chicken nuggets. And I have to say, it was kind of a moment of unity because everyone's like, of course we want that. Let's
Yeah.
get back to that. Because of course, Manchester Essex has gardens and you can rent one for the summer. We've talked about that. It's a really cheap thing to do. For $50, I think, for the summer. If it's more expensive, I'm sorry. I may be saying that for a fact, but it's about that. You can rent a huge bed and you have water right there and you can do like that. So they used to get their food from there and they used to teach science on their gardens. So, and they don't do that since COVID, but they'll get back to it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say, what's the used to part? Yeah.
Yeah. So there you have it. That's what happened. It was a little heated at certain points, particularly for the candidate. There's one candidate who really is tuned into parents' rights and the ability to be able to decide what my child, what they're going to be learning when. But even that person, even that candidate opened up by saying, listen, the idea that we should be loving and good to other people shouldn't have to be an issue. It's unfortunate that it is an issue, but the truth is we should have been learning, we should be teaching our children to be inclusive and loving and embracing of all types of people. We should always be doing that. So it wasn't like there was this nasty person who believes let's bring in the racists,
Right.
So anyway, it's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. So Erika, we talked about this from time to time. Was there any discussion about students opting out of the Manchester Essex school system?
Opting, no, although the idea of the numbers of students came up and Pam Bodwin, the superintendent of schools, was there on hand to essentially fact check certain parts of the discussion. And one of the things that she did come up and talk about was enrollment and enrollment numbers, enrollment trends, and how that impacts the assessment for each town and the costs of the education. But I got to tell you, that wasn't a central part of the discussion. And every single one of the candidates, with the exception of one, but even the one, she was already there, said they would support a Proposition 2.5 override next year. And that's really what you're getting down to when you're talking about numbers and cost. And that's the only context in which it came up. And the person who didn't full-throatedly support a Proposition 2.5 override, she said, I would just have to know what the numbers are. I'm not going to commit to something without knowing. But she basically said, I'm for a performance school. I'm not for undercutting or kneecapping the school's ability to be great. So she was saying all the right things that she would support an override if it were warranted.
Gotcha. So do you have final details for tomorrow's election? The when, the wheres?
Yeah, it's at the election is Tuesday, May the 17th, tomorrow. But the polls open up at Manchester Memorial School, which is on Lincoln Street at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 o'clock p.m. There
you have it. Anything else, Erika?
No, isn't that enough?
It's been a lot going on over in your little corner of the world lately.
Already, I felt like it was a good season. And the fact that we had 2 in-person forums was very interesting. And this is the format we're probably going to do next year. It's going to be 1623, the cricket, and an in-person forum with some sort of partner organization in the community.
Okay. Another busy week ahead over in Manchester and Essex. Okay, thanks for your time, Erika. Get the cricket, folks, and keep posted on everything that's going on there, just like Erika does for us every Monday. Bye for now, Erika.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.